Chapter 661 Precious Tether. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The towering demon and the hideous cripple stared at each other for a bit, their eyes wide with shock. Now Wei, he was here all along. Wait, who dared to do this to Kai? When I find the bastard, I'll tear them limb from limb. Sunny was so stunned that he even failed to let go of the emerald amulet. He gritted his fangs, then asked a question, at the same time as Kai did. Who did this to you? Why are you so tall? Flustered, the two fell silent for a moment. Then, Sunny reached out and grabbed the cripple into a crushing hug, wrapping all of his 4 arms around him. Who knew that this repulsive body, which was covered in dirty bandages that smelled of blood and pus, would suddenly become so precious and dear to him? I was put into a body of a demon, why wouldn't I be tall, you idiot? Kai let out a startled yelp, struggled weakly, and then patted Sunny on one of the arms. Arg! Sunny! I am very glad to see you, as well, but, my burns. Sunny jolted, then hurriedly let go of the cripple's body and gave him an apologetic look. Beneath that simple emotion, though, a dark ocean of fury smoldered with dangerous flames. Sorry. I didn't. Kai. You're alive. Damn, I am so happy to see you. I was starting to wonder if any of you guys have made it alive. Kai looked at him, then smiled. Through the gaps in the bandages, his disfigured face looked ghastly and hideous, but the sparks glinting in his eyes were the same. He sighed. Yeah. I was fearing the same. The young man hesitated, and then added, his voice suddenly ringing hollow. After the Iron Hand Island. I almost gave up hope. I didn't think that I'll see any of you ever again. Sunny frowned, confused by Kai's words. He dismissed his bow, and then thought tensely. Why? What is on the Iron Hand Island? The cripple looked at him with surprise. You haven't been there. Sunny shook his head. No. I was going to travel there in a week, after my new heart settles. Ah. I made a deal with a sorcerer, you see, to replace a heart I lost. Kai stared at him for a bit, then looked down and let out a heavy sigh. I see. Well, there's not much to tell. He remained silent for a few moments, and then said quietly, his hoarse voice growing even more creaky and grating. There was no sign that you or Cassie had ever managed to reach the rendezvous point, even though months had already passed. But Effie left a message there, carved into a stone pillar. So Effie is alive, too. Sunny clenched his fists, excited. Of course she was alive. That glutton would never die and leave all the food in 2 worlds uneaten. Encouraged, he eagerly asked. What message did she leave? Kai looked away, as if reluctant to answer. After a while, he finally opened his mouth and said quietly. It was just 1 sentence. The young man glanced at Sunny, then added in a somber tone. Do not come to the Temple of the Chalice. As it turned out, Kai had reached the sanctuary 2 weeks before Sunny. Although he did not go into detail, the archer explained that he had been sent into the body of an officer in the army of the Ivory City, and got entangled in the conflict between the Sun People and the Warmongers for the first months of the nightmare. Eventually, he managed to escape and made his way east. The journey was slow and torturous because of how terribly mangled his body was, but he somehow made it to the Iron Hand Island alive, if just barely. There, his hope of reuniting with his friends was cruelly crushed by the fact that neither Sunny nor Cassie seemed to have made it, while Effie had only left an ominous message imploring them to not try to find her. Consumed by terrible pain and despair, Kai left his own message on the island and continued to the sanctuary, where, as he had heard, stragglers like him could find refuge and shelter. He remained there since, trying to recover as much strength as he could and hoping against all logic that the others were going to read the message he had left and come to the sanctuary, too. And then, through a strange twist of fate, Sunny arrived despite not even visiting the Iron Hand Island. Kai shook his head and said, his voice full of amusement. How did you even end up here? Arriving on that flying ship, no less. Sonny, do you know who its captain is? Sonny nodded. Who else? It's Noctis, that guy goes around insisting that he is now my best friend. You see. The spell sent me into the Warmongers' territory, where I was captured and forced to participate in their wicked trials. I barely escaped with my life, and stumbled upon him while fleeing to the southern island. He needed a favor from a shadow creature, and I needed passage to the eastern parts of the Chained Isles. So, that's how I arrived here on that ship. He grew silent for a bit and scowled, thinking feverishly. Do not come to the Temple of the Chalice, that was what Effie had written on a stone pillar. However, Sonny had heard of the place before, in the nightmare of the Shadow Lord. Give the glass knife to the War Maiden in the Temple of the Chalice, that was what the immortal Shadow had told the original owner of the four-armed demon's body. And that was the secret Noctis wanted to learn from Sonny, while Sonny wanted to find his friends. So many coincidences. Kai cleared his throat. You know who he is, right? Lord Noctis is the master of this place, as well as one of the 5 transcendent immortals. Throughout the Kingdom of Hope, he is feared and revered in equal measure, and his name is synonymous with mystery and power, as well as debauchery, mischief, and disaster. A being like him, although Lord Noctis is rumored to possess a merciful heart, he is still dangerous and terrifying. Sonny. Are you sure that you should be getting entangled with such a being? Sonny glanced at Kai and remained silent for a while, then said in a grim tone. There is not much choice. He is the axis of this nightmare. Dangerous, terrifying. Noctis is all that, and also so much more. However, all of that is not very important right now. He sighed, and then turned toward the residence of the frightening immortal with a dark expression on his face. What's important right now, is that he can help us find Effie. Chapter 662 Demon's Bargain. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then looked at Kai and said with determination. Let's go. Kai nodded and followed the four-armed demon, pushing forward his bandaged body with visible effort. Seeing his friend suffering, Sonny gritted his teeth. The archer, meanwhile, glanced at him with a grim expression, and then said in his new, unfamiliar, and ugly voice. Sonny. I have one question. Can you answer it? Sonny slowed down and turned to him, a deep scowl contorting the bestial lines of his face. Of course. What is it? Kai remained silent for a bit, then asked cautiously. Where, exactly, are we going? Sonny blinked a couple of times, then tilted his head a little. Oh, right. Where else? We are going to talk to Noctis. With that, he turned around and continued walking toward the immortal sorcerer's residence. The archer hurried to catch up, then said in a stifled tone. Ah, that Noctis. The immortal transcendent. Blessed of the moon, crimson beast of twilight, chain lord of the Kingdom of Hope, and all that. Sonny glanced at him, then shrugged. Yes, that Noctis. Don't worry, though, he is indeed terrifying, but not unreasonable. Together, they crossed the garden of the sanctuary and approached the beautifully engraved wooden door. A pair of sailor dolls were standing guard outside, their indifferent faces staring at them with hollow stillness. Noticing Sonny, one of them moved aside and knocked on the door, which then opened all by itself. The two of them entered and froze, unsure how to react. What the hell? Noctis was levitating above the floor, his legs crossed and his eyes closed. He might have seemed like a wise sage in the middle of a deep meditation, if not for dozens of empty amphoras of wine that floated all around him. The terrifying Chain Lord, blessed of the moon, the crimson beast of twilight, was dead drunk. Hearing someone enter, Noctis lazily opened one eye and stared at Sonny, then at Kai. Finally, he landed on the floor and yawned, causing all the amphras to fall down and shatter, sending drops of wine flying everywhere and staining the luscious carpets. Ah, Sunless! What a nice surprise, to see you so soon. And, you brought someone with you. What a hideous creature. Wait, did I say that out loud? No, surely not. I am too wise and courteous to make a rude remark like that. Of course. Nice to meet you, whoever you are. Welcome, to my quarters. He gave them a radiant smile, then waved a hand, causing the whole residence to shudder and the shards of the amphras to disappear without a trace. Then, Noctis walked over to a small table, picked up a fresh apple, and glanced at his guests with a curious expression. To what do you owe the honor? To what do we owe? Wait, wasn't it supposed to be the other way around? Sunny frowned, then glanced at Kai, who was staring at the immortal sorcerer with an inexorable expression on his burned, disfigured face. Finally, he cleared his throat and turned to Noctis. Actually, I am here to deliver some good news. Do you remember the friends I told you about? Well, this is one of them. And, yes, you did say it out loud. The sorcerer stared at Kai, blinked a couple of times, then took a bite out of the apple. Oh, so this is one of the friends that you were supposed to find after visiting an island that doesn't exist, despite not knowing how they look, where they are, and what they are called. He just happened to be here, in my sanctuary. How fortunate. Sunny smiled. Indeed. This is Nightingale, my dear friend. A man with a voice of an angel, and a face to go along with it. Kai spared him a sidelong glance, then bowed slightly and forced out a grating, creaky greeting. It is, nice to meet you, Lord Noctis. The sorcerer shuddered and looked right and left, then shook his head. Gods, Sunless, do not ever mention those creatures again, even in jest. Angels are not something to be called upon, whether by name or in passing. Then, he briefly touched the symbol of the moon on his forehead and sighed. Anyway, I am glad that you have found one of your friends. Have the two of you discussed my proposal? Sunny hesitated for a bit, then answered somberly. No, we have not. We still need to find two more friends for that. However. He sighed, knowing that the luxury of having a choice was looking more and more distant by the day. But he needed the sorcerer's help and his knowledge to find and retrieve Effie from the mysterious temple of the chalice. In that particular matter, he was willing to compromise. Even if he gave up the secret of the glass knife, he would still be in possession of the obsidian one. Sunny crossed two of his forearms, and said. I am willing to share the location of the Shadow Lord's knife with you, in exchange for some assistance. Noctis stared at him for some time, then suddenly grinned. Really? What assistance do you require? I am the most helpful person in the Kingdom of Hope, you know. Sunny raised two fingers. First, you will help treat my friend's wounds. Second, you will help us rescue another of our other friends from the place she is being held in. He thought for a bit, and then raised a third finger. Oh. And also, coins. You will give me lots of Noctis coins. The sorcerer ate his apple in silence for a bit, then laughed. Well. I think I can do 2 out of those 3 things, at least. No problem. So, tell me. Where is your other friend being held? Sunny lingered for a few moments, still hesitant to make the bargain. Finally, he sighed, and said. Temple of the Chalice. Noctis suddenly choked on the apple, coughed violently a few times, then grabbed a glass of wine and nervously emptied it. Then, with a flushed face, he glanced at Sunny and forced out a strange smile. 1. I think I can do 1 out of those 3 things, at least. Chapter 663 Heralds of War. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sunny scowled, surprised by that reaction. He glanced at Kai, then motioned for him to sit down. From the looks of it, this conversation was going to be a long one. The archer cautiously lowered himself onto a nearby chair and let out a quiet groan of pain, then looked around, a hint of curiosity appearing in his cloudy eyes. His gaze lingered on various pieces of furniture and exquisite decorations, then finally settled on the flustered sorcerer. Noctis seemed to have regained his composure somewhat. He stared at his half-eaten apple with a somber expression, then threw it away and sat down himself. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. The 3 things you asked for are not that easy to accomplish. The immortal glanced at Kai, then raised one elegant finger. I can help your friend, Nightingale, recover from his wounds, somewhat. Those burns were not delivered by mundane flames, and so, even I would not be able to restore that which was destroyed completely. With my help, he will be able to regain most of his strength and vitality. I can also repair the damage done to his soul. But the flames, their mark will remain. Unless you want me to build him a completely new vessel, of course. Noctis smiled, and then glanced at one of the wooden mannequins, which was in the process of disposing of the carelessly discarded apple. Something like that, but much better. Kai shivered. Will I be able to draw a bow and control soul essence after you treat my body? The sorcerer nodded. Of course. You might even grow stronger than you were before. But your face. I am sorry to say this, Nightingale, but it will remain as hideous as it is now. The pain that consumes you will subside, but never go away completely. If you agree to transfer your soul into a doll, on the other hand, your strength will diminish slightly, but you won't have to endure that suffering anymore. I can also promise to make a truly beautiful vessel for you, one worthy of carrying even the most radiant of souls. The archer remained silent for a while, then smiled. No need. This face suits me fine. As long as I can draw a bow and help my friends, I will be content. Noctis looked at him silently, an expression of confusion written clearly on his face. But don't you want to become beautiful? Kai chuckled, his voice hoarse and grating. Then, he shook his head and said simply. That I already am. Both Noctis and Sunny stared at the archer with dubious expressions, thinking that he had lost his mind. Well, more than anyone else in the Kingdom of Hope had already lost theirs. His disfigured face was ugly, grotesque, and unsightly. What was he even trying to say? However, it did not seem that Kai felt compelled to expand on that strange statement. He just remained silent, calmly looking at the sorcerer. After a few moments, Noctis turned away and shrugged. Well, as you wish. The treatment will be long and painful, but it can be done. Then, he raised a second finger and glanced at Sunny. The other thing you asked for, lots of my coins, was it? To be honest, how do I say this, no. Sunny blinked, surprised. What? Why? The sorcerer yawned, then made a helpless gesture with his hands. What can I say? Making those coins takes time. Do you know how long it took me to create a few thousand before? Each coin contains a piece of a corrupted soul, after all. That is the reason why they are so valuable, precious, and coveted by everyone in the Kingdom of Hope. He thought for a few moments and added absent-mindedly. Oh, now that you reminded me, only most of the souls were corrupted. I think there were a few humans I fed to the mimic, as well. Regardless, all those coins were consumed when that poor fool claimed the obsidian knife from the altar. So, if you really want me to make new ones, I guess I can quickly kill everyone here in the sanctuary and cook up 100 or 2. Sunny shivered, then hurriedly raised his hands. No need. Let's not kill anyone, yet. Noctis smiled. Are you sure? Well, all right. So then. He raised the third finger. Lastly, the Temple of the Chalice. I am sorry to say this, but there is absolutely no chance of me ever going anywhere near that place again. Not that I could, even if I wanted to. And I don't. Ever. Sunny stared at the sorcerer with a deep scowl, then gritted his teeth. Why? What is so terrible about that place? Noctis shivered, then sighed and nervously sipped his wine. Oh, it's not that it's terrible. It's just that men aren't allowed to enter the temple, unless they are serving a woman. They put that rule in place, after the last time I visited. Sunny really tried to not let his face change, and simply glared at Noctis, his eye twitching. Uncomfortable under that murderous gaze, the sorcerer shrunk and looked away. A low growl escaped from Sunny's mouth. Who cares? You are one of the Chain Lords. What can they do if you decide to break that rule? Noctis chuckled nervously. You don't get it. Chain Lord or not. You see, Sunless, as I said, my lands became somewhat of a refuge for those who seek it. And one of the groups of refugees I sheltered was the remains of an ancient and rather terrifying sect. This sect takes in orphaned girls, especially those born with red hair, and trains them to become perfect vessels of war. His deadly tools, priestesses, and heralds, the war maidens are not someone to be trifled with. He grew silent for a moment, and then added. In fact, they only needed my protection because there was a schism within the sect, and one of their disciples left to create her own cult. However, since no one can really leave that sect alive, her departure was not amicable. Those who survived it came here to build the Temple of the Chalice, and remained there since. Oh, and that runaway disciple of theirs. I think you have already met her. Sunny grew cold and leaned back, feeling both of his hearts skip a couple of beats. Then, he closed his eyes for a few moments, and finally said in a hoarse voice. Do you mean to tell me, that the sect that dwells in the Temple of the Chalice, is where Solvain comes from? Noctis nodded and gave him a ghostly smile. Exactly. That is where that fiend was raised. And there is a bunch of little monsters just like her being trained there as we speak. I mean, no one can really compare to Solvain, but they are not too far off. So you can understand why I am reluctant to break my word and make enemies of the war maidens, right? Sunny remained silent for a while, and then sighed heavily. Holding the emerald amulet in one of his calloused hands, he thought. Well. Tough luck. Because that is exactly where the glass knife is. Despite his grim mood, Sunny felt a bit of vindictive satisfaction when he saw the sorcerer's handsome face pale, and the glass of wine slip from his hand. Chapter 664 Basic Logic. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A tense silence settled in the opulent residence of the mad sorcerer, who, meanwhile, was staring at Sunny with an indescribable expression on his pale, beautiful face. Noctis didn't seem happy at all despite finally learning the secret that he had been searching for all this time. In that silence, Kai's hoarse voice suddenly resounded, full of polite curiosity. I am very sorry, but that glass knife you are talking about, why exactly do we need it? Both Sunny and Noctis turned to him. After an awkward pause, the immortal scratched the back of his head and answered. That thing, you see, is the only thing that can kill Severus, the blessed of the sun. And I really want to kill him. Noticing a slight confusion on the archer's face, he thought for a moment, and then added. Right, these days people call him Severax, the Ivory Lord. You have heard of him, yes. Kai lingered for a bit, then looked down at his bandaged hands and said evenly. Yes. You might say that I have. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then smiled. In that case, we must retrieve the glass knife. And our friend. Lord Noctis, surely, there is something that we can do. You know a lot about that sect of theirs. Is there a way for you to enter the Temple of the Chalice, find both the knife and our friend, and bring them back to the sanctuary? Noctis stared at him for a while, then shook his head. No, there is no way for me to invade the temple. At least not without destroying it completely, which would doom that friend of yours along with the rest of the sect. Sadly, that is also one of the places I can't infiltrate in disguise. Infiltrate it again, I mean. Sunny and Kai glanced at each other, and then, the archer cautiously asked. If that is the case, what if we infiltrate it, instead? The sorcerer stared at them with surprise, and then laughed. Sunless and Nightingale, what a strange pair you are. Do you not know fear? I have just told you how frightening the war maidens are. Sunny smiled, showing his sharp fangs, and then shrugged. Kai shook his head and answered for both of them, saving him from having to do so. Oh, on the contrary. Both of us are actually very cowardly. But, Lord Noctis, you might not know this, but Sunless and I, we can be a bit frightening ourselves. The immortal transcendent gave them a dubious look, and then shook his head. Somehow, I believe it. But no, it doesn't matter. Even if you are willing, you can't get into the Temple of the Chalice. Only women are allowed inside, and not any women at that. They will only give passage to female warriors of utmost skill, those who are veiled in dread and the smell of numerous bloody battlefields, maybe with a couple of lowly servants, at best. You are both men, so it is useless to even try. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then sighed deeply and said. Actually, that won't be a problem. Noctis blinked a couple of times and looked at him with confused amusement. How so? Sunless. The sorcerer gave him a strange look, and then asked with a mischievous smile. Is there something I don't know about you? Sunny glanced at him darkly, scowled, and answered in a sharp tone. There's plenty. But that was not what I meant. I just have a female warrior of dreadful skill at hand. With that, he summoned Saint. 2 ruby flames ignited in the depths of his shadow, and then the taciturn demon stepped out of it, wreathed in darkness. Her graceful figure appeared in the middle of the sorcerer's residence, and then the shadow turned her head slightly, staring at the master of the place with cold indifference. Noctis looked back at her, his eyes widening. His lips trembled. That. The sorcerer leaned forward, his expression frozen, and then suddenly clenched his fists with excitement. That armor. The design. The fit. Oh, gods, who forged that masterpiece? Sunless, please tell me. Saint tilted her head a little, while Sunny and Kai stared at the immortal transcendent with inexorable expressions. After a few moments of dead silence, Sunny cleared his throat. Actually, I am not sure. Prince of the Underworld, I think. Wait, haven't you seen me wearing a similar armor? Noctis glanced at him with confusion, then waved a hand dismissively. If I did, you must have not done it justice. This beauty, however, so it was Hope's little brother, huh? Who knew he had such impeccable taste? Finally, the sorcerer became aware of his surroundings and moved his gaze up, staring right into Saint's ruby eyes. His smile widened, but then grew rather strange. He glanced at Sunny with confusion. Sunless, this is one of your shadows, yes. How come she is more powerful than you? Oh, did you inherit this sublime creature from the Shadow Lord? That rogue, he had been hiding such a treasure from me all that time. Sunny did not like the way Noctis was looking at Saint one bit. In fact, he suddenly felt a very strong impulse to wipe the lecherous smile off the immortal's face, which would not have been very wise, considering who that immortal actually was. He gritted his teeth. No. If you must know, I've created her myself. And also, she can hear you. Have some manners, will you? Noctis froze, then flinched and suddenly turned very courteous. Sorry. He glanced at Saint, then walked around her, studying the taciturn demon with a very serious expression. The shadow didn't move, seemingly uncaring of his presence. Finally, the sorcerer returned to his previous spot and smiled. That shadow of yours might indeed be allowed into the Temple of the Chalice. She has a presence about her. Even I am impressed. The 2 of you will pose as her servants, I assume. Sunny and Kai looked at each other, then nodded. The sorcerer turned away, thinking, then said thoughtfully. That might actually work. Once you are inside, you can find your friend and locate the glass knife. That will be extremely dangerous, but not impossible. If you succeed, I can ensure your safe escape, however. Noctis glanced at them, his expression growing somber. Sunless, Nightingale, if things go wrong inside the Temple of the Chalice, even I won't be able to save you. You will be on your own, so ask yourself seriously whether or not rescuing your friend is worth risking your lives over. You can make new friends, you know, but you can only die once. Kai looked at the immortal sorcerer, and smiled. That it's worth it. Sunny wasn't so quick to speak. After a while, he snorted and looked away. I don't make friends easily, so the ones I do have are extremely valuable. One has to protect their valuables, you know. That's just basic logic. He glanced at Noctis with a dark expression and added. Besides, who says that you can only die once? I have already died 100 times, and that was just after meeting you. Killing me is really a very troublesome endeavor. Chapter 665 Preparations. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After their conversation with Noctis was done, Sunny and Kai left the sorcerer alone. The immortal needed some time to make preparations, so they had a few hours left before the archer's treatment was going to begin. After that, they were not going to see each other again until it was over, which would take at least a week. Walking through the beautiful garden of the sanctuary, Kai remained silent for a bit, and then said with a smile. Well. I think that went well. Sunny glanced at him with a dark expression. You think? The archer shrugged, then frowned a little. The bandages covering his disfigured face moved, revealing a confused expression. Did it not? Sunny shook his head. No. We have been swindled, actually. Think about it. I wanted to get 3 things out of Noctis in exchange for revealing the location of the glass knife to him. Heal you, rescue Effie, and receive his enchanted coins. Not only did he force the secret out of me without even lifting a finger, he even fooled us into retrieving the knife in his stead, while thinking that it was our own idea, no less. He grimaced, then let out a heavy sigh. Scary. He is a cunning trickster, and my own mind seems to be dulled by the curse of hope. Still, all is well. Noctis will heal your body, nothing else matters. Kai frowned when Sunny mentioned Hope's influence, but didn't ask anything, revealing that he had made the discovery himself. After a while, he said. When you put it like that, I do feel a bit foolish. But, Sunny, if you knew that we are being swindled, why didn't you try to drive a harder bargain? Sunny shrugged. There was no point to. I did not expect him to honor all 3 of my requests, anyway, 2 of them were just for show. While those coins of his are useful, I can do without them. As for rescuing Effie, that is our own task. I would not have entrusted it to an outsider, especially an ancient transcendent with mysterious motives. He remained silent for a few moments, and then added. We will have to ally ourselves with at least one of the chain lords in order to conquer this nightmare, but becoming dependent on someone else's strength is a slippery slope. In the end, we can only put trust in our own efforts. Kai tilted his head a little. So, those 2 requests were just bait, and your real intention had only been to get Noctis to heal me. Lost in thought, Sunny simply nodded. The archer smiled, then mumbled under his nose. I wonder who swindled whom, then. They reached their corner of the garden in silence and sat down on the grass. There was so much Sunny wanted to tell Kai, and so much he wanted to ask. He was sure that Kai felt the same. But without even having to say anything, both of them decided to remain silent. They had already shared some things about their experiences in the nightmare, and as for details, that was going to have to wait until the cohort was back together. Even knowing that it was foolish, they both held on to the feeling that by postponing this conversation, they were somehow increasing the chances of the other 2 members joining them unharmed. BL.net. After a while, Kai asked. Do you think that she is all right? Effie. From what Noctis said, that sect is incredibly ancient, formidable, and cruel. If Effie was sent into the body of a disciple, with her temper. I hate to admit it, but I am afraid for her. Plus, none of the maidens is allowed to leave that temple alive. How are we going to take her away? Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head. Effie is more resilient than any of us. Don't forget, she survived in the Dark City far longer than you or I, completely alone. She held the line during the siege of the Spire and survived that, too. Effie will be fine. The War Maidens are not as formidable as you might think either. After all, the Temple of the Chalice is destroyed in the future, and all of them are dead. I've seen the bones myself. His face grew somber when he remembered the furious wraiths whom he had slain to create his third core. Who could have known that the ruin he had already explored and the Temple of the Chalice were one and the same? Judging by the destruction that reigned over the ancient temple in the future, someone was going to obliterate the fearsome sect between then and now. The War Maidens weren't invincible. Kai sighed. What about Cassie? There is no sign of her. She is not like the rest of us. Her combat skill is commendable, but her aspect is not tailored toward direct confrontation. And with how terrible her flaw is. He grew silent, reluctant to finish the thought. Sunny grinned. Cassie. She is the last person you should be worried about. Believe me, she is doing fine. Probably better than any of us. At least, that was what Sunny wanted to believe. His flaw did not prevent him from saying those words aloud, so he must have been convinced that the statement was true to some degree, at least. However, that didn't stop his hearts from growing cold and heavy. He sighed, and then added in a grim tone. Who you should really be worried about is our fifth friend. Kai frowned and looked at him with a dark expression. It has to be that person, right? The Prince of Valor. Sunny hesitated, then nodded. That is what I believe, as well. The archer gritted his teeth and turned away. It doesn't matter. Here in the nightmare, all of us are allies. Are we not? Sunny looked down, his black eyes growing even darker. After a while, he said. We are meant to be. However, that doesn't mean that we have to be. He sighed, and then looked at the people going about their lives in the distance. Mordred is unpredictable. And dangerous. I don't know what his goals are, but in this nightmare, his power would have grown considerably. Don't forget that he was the one who discovered this seed, in the first place, and that wasn't by accident. He was searching for it on purpose. He is after something. Sunny grew silent for a few moments and then added, his voice turning grim. Plus, there was already something wrong with Mordred in the waking world. Who knows what effect hope had on him? If he had truly gone insane. He shuddered. Then the immortal saints might end up not being our biggest problem. With that, Sunny stood up and summoned the vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud, then glanced at Kai with a strange glint in his eyes. Anyway, since we have a few hours left before Noctis straps you to a table and does spell knows what to your body. How about you show me how to properly use a bow? While you still can. While there's a chance, I mean. Chapter 666 Dark Rider. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The sun was slowly drowning in the darkness of the void, and as it did, a veil of shadows was devouring the world. The western horizon was still aflame with the scarlet pyre of the sunset, but the somber night was already approaching from the east. On a desolate island covered by tall pillars of jagged rock, a numinous temple stood, its beautiful stone walls painted red by the light of the drowning sun. All around it, countless swords were thrust into the petrous ground, rising from it like a solemn graveyard of steel. There was only one path through the forest of blades, and as the twilight of dusk approached it, a dull, echoing ringing suddenly resounded from the darkness, then traveled through it, slowly growing closer and closer. It was the sound of adamantine hooves ringing against stone. Soon, 4 crimson flames ignited in the shadows, and then revealed themselves to be 4 eyes. 2 belonged to a Stygian destrier, the other 2 to its dark rider. The steed was black as night, with dreadful horns crowning its head. It walked forward with a steady pace, fearsome and noble, lean muscles rolling under its lustreless coat. The rider was a graceful woman in intricate onyx armor, her face hidden behind the visor of a closed helmet, with only ruby lights shining through it with indifferent resolve. Her presence was both calm and fearsome, full of quiet confidence and frightening strength. The blade of a great odachi rested on her shoulder, its steel as dark as the heart of the night. 2 steps behind the taciturn knight, 2 creatures walked with their gazes lowered to the ground. One was a towering, 4-armed demon dressed in a black kimono, his dark hair tied with a silk ribbon. The other was a strange human with skin that resembled polished bark, wearing a fitting dark garment made of soft silk, his disfigured face hidden behind a wooden mask and drowning in the shadow of a deep hood. Neither of them was armed. The Dark Knight led her horse to the first steps of the path through the graveyard of swords and stopped, waiting. Her ruby eyes burned with cold calmness, as if the woman had a heart made of stone, incapable of feeling fear, unease, or trepidation. Her servants, however, were not as aloof. Both stole glances at the magnificent stone temple, tension clearly written on their faces. A few moments later, the human asked quietly. "It is too late to turn back, isn't it?" The demon did not respond, not that he was capable of speaking in the human tongue. Instead, he simply nodded, then froze, as if sensing something. The other servant sighed and grew silent, as well. There was no one and nothing around them, just the pillars of jagged rocks and the swords thrust into the ground. The island was awash in the blood-red radiance of the dying sunset, with deep shadows nesting in the spots from where the sunlight had already fled. A gust of wind suddenly blew, bringing with it the smell of iron. And then, out of nowhere, they were surrounded by a dozen silent figures. All of them were beautiful women, wearing light garments made of red silk. Their bodies were slender and supple, their skin smooth and soft. The sight of them might have been alluring if not for the sharp coldness of their eyes, the ruthless expressions written on their tantalizing faces, and the murderous glint of their blades, all aimed at the uninvited guests. Sunny shivered. Damnation! Noctis had not been joking when he described the war maidens as fearsome. Even though these women were just awakened, his intuition was screaming that they represented mortal danger. However, Sunny did not need the help of his enhanced sixth sense to understand that. The feeling he got from the female warriors was the same as he had experienced a few times before in his life, when facing true battle masters. Morgan of Valor had given him the same frightening sensation, as well as Oro of the Nine, Master Jet, Nephis, and a couple of others, all of them elite combatants of the highest tier. Some of these fiends he had fought and somehow survived, but not without shedding a lot of blood and receiving deep scars, if not on his body, then on his soul. And right now, he was staring at 12 of such monsters, and these were just the sentinels, no doubt. Who knew what kind of battle saints would he meet inside the temple? No wonder this sect had been Sylvain's cradle. Full of bad premonitions, he made sure to not make any sudden movements and continued staring at the ground. His role during this part was rather simple. He just had to do nothing. Her master might have been apprehensive, but Saint didn't seem concerned at all. She turned her head slightly and looked down at the war maidens, her gaze as calm and indifferent as always. Noticing her calmness, a few of the female warriors gripped their weapons tighter. One of them, a tall woman with red hair and eyes the color of steel, frowned a little, and then asked in a raspy voice. "What brings you to the Temple of the Chalice, Demonis?" Saint, of course, remained silent. Instead, Kai took a step forward and bowed, then spoke, his ugly voice sounding like grating scritching of rusty metal. "Greetings, warriors. My lady." The war maiden looked at him with distaste and interrupted. "Who allowed you to speak, man?" Kai remained bowed for a few moments, then straightened and looked at the woman from beneath his hood. My lady's voice is not for you to hear. She only speaks to those who bested her in combat, and thus, she has not spoken ever since taking this solemn vow. The war maiden remained silent for a few moments, studying Saint's graceful and fearsome figure. Then, she smiled darkly. She must not have fought anyone worth fighting, then. You are her servant. Kai nodded. Indeed. I am her voice, and that creature over there is her shadow. We serve the lady. The woman lingered for a moment, then glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. What is a human like you doing in the company of two shadows? The archer remained silent for a few seconds, and then responded. A long time ago, evil people captured me and locked me in a deep, dark well. I was going to die in there of thirst and hunger, but my lady lifted the heavy grate and helped me escape, while that demon slaughtered the evildoers. I owe them a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. The war maiden stared at him silently, then nodded. You speak with sincerity, surprising, for a man. Tell me, then, why has your lady come to our temple? Kai glanced at Saint and hesitated for a bit. Sunny felt his heart start to beat faster, as well. This was the most dangerous part of their plan. In fact, he was still not entirely sure that it was going to be a wise move. However, both of them had decided that while not very wise, this was something that would give them the best chance to succeed. Full of tense anticipation, he silently gritted his teeth. Finally, the archer looked at the war maiden and said, his voice calm and steady. She has come to take back that which belongs to the shadows. To retrieve the death of the Ivory Lord from your hands, whether you are willing to return it, or not. Chapter 667 Temple of the Chalice. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The glass knife contained the string of fate that belonged to Severax, the Chain Lord of the Ivory City. It was his death, which the war maidens had received from the Saint of Shadows hundreds of years ago. Now, two shadows came back to retrieve it. Sunny suspected that none of the sect members that had been alive all those centuries ago lived still, including the particular maiden to whom Shadow Lord had sent the glass knife before taking his own life. As such, none would remember the four-armed demon who had delivered it, most likely. And yet, the current disciples of the cult had to know what was being kept in their temple, and how it got there. So, there was a chance that they will just hand it over to the original owners, no matter how slim. If not, they would allow Saint and her entourage inside, at least. That was Sunny's hope, and judging by the fact that the maidens did not immediately attack after hearing Kai's provocative statement, his calculations were not wrong. The tall woman who had spoken to them grew still as soon as the glass knife was mentioned, a somber expression appearing on her face. She studied Saint's motionless figure, then said coldly, her raspy voice growing slightly hoarse. So the day has come. How fortunate we are, to witness it. Someone finally dares to challenge the Red Sect for the ownership of the ancient relic. Who knew that I would witness this children's story come true? She smiled darkly, then tilted her head, no humor in her sharp, gray eyes. However, you are wrong, Shadow. The glass blade does not belong to you, or any of your kin. It had been entrusted to our foremother, who passed on the duty of protecting it to her wards, and through them, to us. The woman lingered, then sighed. However, it is not my place, to put you in yours. Come, Demonis. Let me welcome you to the Temple of the Chalice. With that, the war maidens slowly lowered their weapons, and then followed their leader as she turned to walk on the path through the graveyard of swords. Surrounded by them, Saint, Sunny, and Kai had no choice but to walk forward. After a few moments, the taciturn demon gracefully jumped down from Nightmare's back, who then dissipated into shadows and returned to Sunny's soul. Despite the fact that the beautiful female warriors had sheathed their swords, their hostility remained aimed at the three strangers, and their gazes were still as sharp and dangerous as steel blades. What an unfriendly bunch! Sunny sighed inwardly, and then looked around through his shadows, paying attention to the countless swords thrust into the ground all around them. Somehow, he felt that each of these weapons had a history, a violent story of battle and bloodshed that ended in death. Perhaps some of these blades had once belonged to the war maidens of the past, but most must have been wielded by those warriors slain by the members of the sect. There were really many swords thrust into the ground around the stone temple. Soon, they approached the gates of the magnificent structure and were led inside. Sunny was somewhat familiar with the interior of the ancient shrine, but it was hard to bring together two pictures that lived in his mind, one of a desolate ruin, the other of the austere, but formidable and perfectly maintained temple fortress. They were ushered into a spacious entrance hall, where Saint followed his command and stopped, as though unwilling to go further. The tall maiden with grey eyes glanced at her and smiled coldly. "Wait here, Demonis. I will inform the elders of your arrival. And you challenge?" Saint stood with the blade of the soul serpent resting on her shoulder, motionless like a beautiful statue cut of black onyx. Her presence was aloof and indifferent, as though the three of them were not surrounded from all sides by fearsome warriors, with no way to escape. The tall maiden left, but the rest of the sentinels remained, surrounding them in a wide circle. Their faces were calm, but their eyes remained sharp, steady hands laying on the hilts of their swords. Under their gazes, Sunny didn't dare to send one of his shadows to scout around the temple, however, he also didn't need to. Instead, he listened to the sound surrounding them with curiosity. The temple of the chalice seemed silent, but somewhere far away, a repeating sound could be heard, the sound of something blunt hitting flesh, over and over again, and an occasional rattle of chains. Disturbed, he frowned slightly, and then glanced at Kai. The archer stood on the other side of Saint, his face hidden in the shadow of a deep hood. His pose seemed both polite and relaxed, however, Sunny could feel a strange tension hidden behind this casual stance. He frowned, and then moved his hand slightly, attracting his friend's attention. Kai lingered for a moment, then spoke in the language of the waking world without turning his head. "Yes, I found it." Why would Sunny need to use his shadows to explore the temple if he had Nightingale by his side? Kai's awakened ability, after all, allowed him to see far and wide, and even peer through solid objects. Very few things could hide from his gaze. So, his task was to locate one of the two things they were looking for, the glass knife. And just in a few minutes, he had already succeeded. Kai, however, did not seem too happy. "Sunny, I think we might have a slight problem." "Damnation." Sunny scowled, not liking the tone of his friend's voice one bit. He turned his head slightly, glaring at the young man in the wooden mask. The archer sighed. "You see, in the center of the temple, there is a large hall. And in the center of that hall stands a giant stone chalice. The chalice is filled to the brim with raging white flame. That fire is just like the fires that burn in the sky below. In fact, I am pretty sure that one of those orbs of divine flame is somehow contained within it." He lingered for a moment, and then added grimly. "The glass knife is on the bottom of the chalice. Right in the middle of the annihilating divine flame." Chapter 668 Vessels of War. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Damn it all. Why did it have to be the divine flame, of all things? The three of them were finally allowed into the central hall of the temple, where a tall chalice cut of a single slab of grey stone stood, full of blinding white fire. The hall was drowning in stark light, deep shadows, and suffocating heat, however, even that sweltering heat was too forgiving. This close to the orb of Sun God's flame, all of them should have been already turned to ash. Sunny stared at the chalice with a grim expression, remembering the suffering he had gone through in the sky below. This was a true remnant of the obliterating pillar of white fire that had been brought down on the kingdom of hope by a god, and then continued to burn in the depths of the shattered land, slowly devouring it until nothing but an empty void remained. The pale version of it that he was able to channel through the cruel sight was already immensely destructive, and this was the real deal. How was the chalice even capable of containing the annihilating white star? He shivered, and then glanced under the surface of the stone vessel, noticing an intricate weave of ancient runes glowing inside the grey stone. An enchantment, and a powerful one, at that. What kind of sorcerer had created it? Who had been powerful enough to contain a piece of divine fury? In any case, without knowing how to control the enchantment, if there even was a way to control it, getting the glass knife out was not going to be easy, or maybe even impossible. Their task just grew exponentially more difficult. Damn it all. Absorbed by the dire sight of the stone chalice, Sunny didn't even notice the three women standing in front of it for a moment or two. When he did, however, his mood dropped even further. Turned into black silhouettes by the furious white flame burning behind them, three ascended battle masters watched the uninvited guests with eyes full of cold, killing intent. One had red hair and wielded an odachi similar to his own, its blade forged out of vibrant scarlet steel. One had black hair and held a simple spear, its shaft covered by a complicated weave of runes. One had white hair and was unarmed. That last one scared him the most. Sylvain, too, didn't feel the need to wield a weapon. If the first two maidens seemed like warriors of terrifying skill, the third one gave him a sensation of being something much more than that. A true vessel of war, perhaps. He carefully looked around the hall, remembering how it had looked in the future. The stone slabs covering the floor had been cracked and misshapen, the mighty pillars broken and toppled over, the roof had collapsed. The walls of the hall, seemingly so strong and unassailable, had been shattered outwards, suggesting that something had detonated in the center of the hall with tremendous force. The chalice itself had been destroyed, with only a few fragments laying on the floor in a molten pile. And there had been human bones littering the hall, some still covered by the remains of red silk garments, with vengeful wraiths carrying murderous fury even thousands of years after the tragedy. Sunny glanced tensely at the dancing white flame, then shivered. Someone had come to the temple of the chalice and destroyed it, slaughtering all the fearsome maidens in the process. Had they been looking for the glass knife, as well? Was he going to meet that terrifying being? Or had he, perhaps, met them already? Two faces suddenly appeared in his mind, that of Sylvain, and that of Noctis. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the ascended maidens. The woman who seemed the most powerful, the fiend with white hair, looked at Saint with a cold expression and said, her voice echoing in the stark darkness of the hall. I've been told that you wish to retrieve the legacy of our foremothers, Shadow. Saint lingered for a moment, then moved her head slightly, nodding. The maiden smiled, sending chills running down Sunny's spine. Then your task is very simple. All you have to do is prove yourself before the chalice. Kill me, and then my two sisters. If you do, the glass blade will be yours. Saint tilted her head a little, expressing an indifferent agreement. Sunny let out a furtive sigh of relief. So, there was a ritual to release that glass knife into someone's hands, after all, a trial that those seeking it had to pass. A simple duel, or rather 3 consecutive ones, against the senior warriors of the ancient sect. These ascended were truly formidable, but fighting them was better than having to face against the entire sect. His worst expectations had not come true. As for whether or not Saint would be able to kill the 3 ascended priestesses, he wasn't sure. However, there was at least a chance. And after the leaders of the sect were dead, finding and rescuing Effie would be much easier. As the war maiden with white hair grew silent, another one, the woman wielding the scarlet odachi, spoke. However, first, you will have to prove that you have the right to challenge us. You will fight and kill a disciple of each of us. As soon as she stopped speaking, the third one said. Or you will die. Sunny hid a triumphant smile. 3 awakened warriors were not going to pose any threat to Saint, who was an ascended demon, and formidable well beyond her rank and class. However, something felt off. He couldn't tell what at the moment, but his intuition was filling his heart with unease. Sunny glanced at Kai, and noticed a similar apprehensive expression in the archer's eyes. He nodded slightly, prompting the young man to step forward and bow. My lady accepts. However, it is unbecoming of her to slaughter your disciples, fearsome as they may be. Such a fight would not be a struggle for her, and as such, would not please the goddess of life, offending her in this sacred temple. If these disciples wish to challenge my lady, they will have to defeat her shadow first. The war maiden with white hair laughed, then took a step forward. So, she can only fight us after defeating our disciples, but our disciples can only fight her after defeating her pet demon. Fine, fine, let it be so. No shadow can defeat a vessel of war. He was going to die after you lady's body is torn apart, anyway. Let the creature be destroyed first. With that, she turned to one of the younger war maidens and smiled darkly. Let us not disappoint our guests. Go, bring the feral child I have the misfortune of calling my successor here. She will atone for her transgressions today by killing these two shadows. Sunny was pushed forward and offered a choice of weapons. After hesitating for a few moments, he raised a fearsome great sword with his upper hands, and took a buckler and a long dagger with the lower. Then, he walked into the center of the hall and froze, watching the divine flames burn in the darkness. All things considered, things had turned out well. The ascended war maidens had been cunning, offering the lives of their disciples as sacrifices, no doubt in order to glean the secrets of saints' skill before facing her. Knowing the enemy was half the victory, after all, by remaining a mystery while observing how their opponent fights, the three battle masters would have received an advantage that Sunny couldn't allow himself to give them. Now, however, he was going to fight and kill three of the awakened maidens, thus keeping Saint as mysterious as these battle masters were. Facing such fearsome opponents was not going to be easy, but he was sure of his ability to outsmart, overpower, and slaughter them. Fighting such skilled warriors was only going to enrich his mastery of shadow dance. More importantly, they were not going to have to fight against the whole sect, the chalice containing the divine flame was not going to be shattered, and the temple was not going to be turned into a ruin. Whatever it had been that had happened here in the real world would not befall Sunny and Kai, leaving them unscathed. All he had to do was to kill three young women, one after another. They would be fearsome combatants, no doubt, especially due to the madness of hope coursing through their veins. But he had faced far worse. Sunny felt confident in his ability. A few moments later, however, his black eyes narrowed. Staring at his first opponent, Sunny couldn't help but shudder and let out a low growl. Damnation. Chapter 669 Feral Child. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. When Sunny heard the white-haired war maiden refer to her disciple as a feral child, he assumed that she was speaking about an especially ferocious female warrior being trained in the ancient sect of war. What he had not expected, however, was that his enemy would turn out to be a literal child. Damnation. As Sunny watched with a grim expression, two of the awakened maidens dragged a girl of about 11, maybe 12 years of age into the hall, then threw her on the stone floor in front of him. The girl had a scrawny, juvenile body that did not seem to have touched on the path to maturity yet. Her short, wild hair was of a vibrant red color, almost the same as the torn silk garments she wore. Her skin was pale and white, or at least, it was supposed to be. Instead, it was blue and black, almost the same color as Sunny's own, which had been made to resemble obsidian by the embrace of his shadows. The girl had obviously been often and cruelly beaten, to the point that it was hard to notice a spot free of bruises on her once tender body. The whites of her eyes were hidden by the cloudy red layer of blood that had burst from ruptured vessels, making the child look like an actual beast. Hitting the floor, the girl remained motionless for a few moments, then let out a long sigh and slowly stood up, lean muscles rolling under her bruised and lacerated skin. Even though she seemed tall for her age, she was still too small to reach up to Sunny's chest. Curse these mad witches! Suddenly full of fury, he glanced at the three ascended war maidens with a dark expression, then looked down at the abused child in front of him. Was this whom he had to kill? Just a few moments ago, the task seemed so easy. The girl, meanwhile, finished picking herself from the floor and faced the war maidens with an insolent, contemptuous expression on her bruised face. With wild flames burning in her eyes, she spat a bit of blood on the floor and then bared her teeth in a feral grin. "What now, you old hags? More training? Ah, and here I was just starting to enjoy my daily punishment." Despite the rude words and the recalcitrant tone, the girl's voice was soft and childishly high, and as the result, what she had meant to sound defiant ended up sounding comical instead. Flustered by that, she gritted her teeth, and then proceeded to make a rude gesture with her hand, as if to better articulate her point. Sonny's heart suddenly grew cold. His flinched slightly, his pupils widening in shock. No, 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 no. He was already torn about the fact that he would have to kill a child, and this was going to be a battle to the death, whether he wanted to or not. The war maidens had made it abundantly clear. Showing mercy would be the same as admitting defeat, thus surrendering both his own life and that of Kai to their slaughter. But when the girl spoke, things took a turn from bad to worse. Because even if he had not recognized that tone, which he instantly did, Sonny was pretty sure that the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Hope were not in the habit of expressing their meaning with their middle fingers. That was a thing humans in the waking world did. Which left only one possibility. The feral child in front of him was Effie. God damn it. Now, there was no chance at all that he would kill his opponent and follow the ritual set for them by the maidens. All that stuff about not having to fight the entire sect he had felt relieved about a few minutes ago. Any possibility of that was basically gone. How were they going to get out of this one? He gritted his teeth, a low growl escaping through them. Hearing it, the senior war maiden smiled coldly, and then stared at Effie. No training today, insolent child. Instead, a test. We have guests today, you see, kill them, and I might order your older sisters to feed you today. You have been demanding food, have you not? At the mention of food, a somber expression appeared on the girl's bruised face. She hesitated for a moment, and then turned around, searching for these guests she was supposed to kill. Because of how the hall was lit, the figures of everyone who stood near the entrance and along the walls, Saint, Kai, and dozens of war maidens who were here to witness the challenge, appeared as dark silhouettes. The only one whom she could clearly see was Sonny. Effie stared at his abdomen for a few moments, confused. Then, she slowly craned her neck, looking higher, and then higher still. Her face gradually grew paler and paler, until a hint of fear appeared in her eyes. Whoa, hey there, big guy. She shivered, then glanced back at her teacher. Are you joking? I am supposed to kill that monster. The war maiden shook her head. Not a monster. A demon. Why, are you not hungry? Effie lingered for a few moments, then asked in a little voice. Do I get any weapons, at least? The white-haired warrior chuckled cruelly. Your fists should be enough. Use your tongue if they're not, it has been sharper than a blade lately, after all. The scrawny girl grimaced, then sighed and clenched her fist, turning to Sonny with hunger and resentment mixing in the bright eyes. Her soft voice resounded in the hall, full of reluctant determination. All right then, let's kill a demon, the things a girl must do to earn a dinner. Sonny lowered his sword, staring at her with furious intent. You idiot. It's me. Are you going to recognize me or not? A weave of runes suddenly ignited on the stone floor of the hall, creating a circle around them. There was some sort of a barrier preventing either from escaping now, and outsiders from offering them help. The only ones left inside were Sonny, Effie, and the three war maidens standing in front of the chalice. Sonny hissed, trying to get the child to look at him. Crap, the emerald amulet, I better get it right now. He released the hilt of the great sword with one hand, intending to use it to fish out the amulet from the folds of his kimono. If Effie doesn't recognize me, I'll have to really fight her until I come up with a plan. Luckily, she is just an awakened. With my 3 cores and shadow augmentation, it should not be 2. Before he could finish the thought, however, the scrawny girl suddenly lunged forward with shocking speed and struck him in the abdomen with her tiny fist. The towering 4-armed demon folded like a piece of paper, spat a torrent of blood, and was thrown a dozen meters back like a weightless doll. Crashing into a stone pillar, he sent a net of cracks running through its gray surface and then rolled down to the floor. Stunned by the tremendous, ridiculous force of that single blow, Sonny tried to push air into his 4 empty lungs and stared at the little girl with dread. Right. That is Effie, all right. Curses. Chapter 670 With Kid Gloves. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Because of Effie's easygoing personality and affable attitude, it was easy to forget just how fearsome of a warrior she was. Out of all the members of the cohort, she had survived on the Forgotten Shore the longest. She had done so while hunting down nightmare creatures on the cursed streets of the Dark City all alone, as well. Mostly because anyone willing to help her would have been disposed of by the ruler of the Bright Castle, who had been scorned by her rejection. The fact that the young huntress had never bowed to his demands despite the black mark placed on her only went to show how unyielding her will really was. Her aspect made Effie a perfect instrument of war. While not as drastic as the dire, but narrow speed augmentation caster had possessed, it was still great and wondrous. More importantly, it was an all-around enhancement: speed, strength, agility, endurance, resilience. Every facet of her physicality was elevated to an inhuman level. Sonny knew of her abilities better than most, since Effie had taught him how to wield a spear. However, due to the fact that their lessons had taken place in the real world, where the huntress was bound to a wheelchair, he never experienced her full strength in a fight himself. Until now. Crap, that really hurt. Before, Sonny had hoped that their strength would be more or less equal, considering that he was augmented by 3 shadows. However, it was not even close. That one blow almost shattered his body into pieces. That was only made more bizarre by the fact that it had been delivered by a scrawny child. Maybe if he had an additional shadow, or 2. Sonny had become much more powerful, but Effie had grown much stronger after the Forgotten Shore, as well. Her core was now fully saturated. More than that, while Sonny had been surviving in the Red Colosseum, she had survived a hell of her own, it seemed. Being tortured, taught, and tempered by the cult that had created Sylvain, of all people. Sonny spat some blood, gritted his teeth, and slowly stood up. This is not good. The little girl glanced at him with surprise and tilted her head a little. Huh, still alive. Damn, tough bastard. He thought of taking out the emerald amulet once again, but Effie gave him no time. A split second later, she was already upon him, her leg flying through the air toward his ribcage. Sonny had no time to think about anything. He didn't want to hurt his friend, but he also didn't want to die. And getting hit by this bruised, wild, monstrous girl was going to kill him soon enough, no doubt. I need to slow her down. Even if his ribs survived Effie's wicked kick due to bone weave, the organs protected by them were not that resilient. The shock would surely rupture something important. Gritting his teeth, Sonny thrust one of his lower hands forward, putting the sharp blade of the dagger in the path of Effie's small, bony, and bruised leg. She was going to have to rethink that attack or risk having her calf cut wide open. Unless, she was using her second aspect ability, of course. Curse it. The dagger slid off the girl's skin without leaving even a scratch on it, as though it was made out of tempered steel. Luckily, Sonny had expected this outcome and was already dodging out of the way. Effie's shin hit the pillar instead of his side, sending a rain of large stone chunks and sharp shards flying through the air. Before Sonny could regain his balance, the next attack came, and then the next, and the next, and the next. Unable to seriously hurt the girl, he had no choice but to retreat under the onslaught of deadly strikes, receiving several glancing blows that left him reeling and in pain. The scrawny girl was very small, but made up for it by being incredibly nimble and swift. The little imp was so wily and fast, in fact, that it almost felt as though she was in several places at the same time. Stop running, big guy. Let us finish this quickly. I am hella hungry, you know. Arg, would you slow down for a second, you devil child? Sunny growled with unrestrained fury and brought the great sword down, creating some space between himself and the advancing girl. He felt very, very frustrated. All he had to do, for now, was to let Effie know who he was. That was not very hard to do, there were many ways, really. He could use one of his shadows, or summon a familiar memory, if only she gave him a damned moment to breathe and think. The problem was that Effie did not. She was also not fighting in any style Sunny was familiar with. He knew her usual technique pretty well, but this assault had nothing in common with it. In fact, her current ferocious style was leagues beyond what the huntress had been capable of in the past, both in terms of purpose and lethality. It was sort of breathtaking. Even when performed by a scrawny child. A memory was the easiest option, since summoning one took only a thought and several seconds. However, that was also the worst option, because doing so would reveal his ability to summon things out of thin air to the maidens. He and Kai had not gone through the trouble of appearing unarmed just to give that advantage away immediately. Think, you fool. There had to be a better way. Sunny deflected another devastating kick and took a step back, then froze for a split second, and threw his buckler away. The thing was hideously bent by now, anyway. With one of his hands now free, he made it into a fist, sent it flying forward. And extended his middle finger with a vicious snarl. Effie, who was already preparing to launch another attack, blinked a couple of times, then looked up at the towering demon with confusion. Ha! Finally. Using Effie's momentary confusion, Sunny lowered his hand and mimed grabbing the rim of a wheel and moving it forward and backward, as if pushing a wheelchair. The little girl frowned, then lunged forward and delivered a crushing strike, but this time, her movements were a bit slower, allowing him to easily dodge out of the way. Purposefully so. Making sure that Effie could see his hand, he attacked with the great sword while simultaneously making a fist again and pretending to have an arm wrestling match with an invisible opponent. The little girl swatted the sword away with her naked forearm, and then, her blood-red eyes suddenly widened. She craned her neck and stared at the towering demon with an inexorable expression, then blurted out in a soft, childish voice. Doofus. Thank God. Took you long enough. Sunny pretended to attack her with the dagger, then dodged a similarly half-hearted kick, and gave the little girl a short nod. Effie's face trembled, and then, she whispered. Why the spell are you so damn tall?